All right. I'm delighted to see everybody here today. Welcome to the Ethics, Justice, and Human Rights Specialty Group plenary lecture. I'm not Monica Barsanyi. Speaking on her behalf today, she's our president. And I'm supposedly the president-elect, but I don't remember there being an election. But I think Monica found 7,000 ballots on her home computer. That's a misconception. So, anyway, this lecture was created a few years back to highlight the ways in which ethics, justice, and human rights and values are, bound into and up with a whole wide, varied range of geographies that have brought us to this conference. The idea of this plenary's founders was to team up with another specialty group to highlight some specific intersections and questions. So this year we're very pleased to be co-sponsoring this lecture with the Economic Geography Specialty Group, so thanks to them. And now I'll introduce Dr. Jerry Pratt, who will introduce today's speaker.
It's a great pleasure and really a great honor to introduce Katherine Gibson, a professorial fellow at the Center for Citizenship and Public Policy at the University of Western Sydney. It's almost 20 years since J.K. Gibson-Graham emerged in the world at a moment of intense creativity in feminist theory. She took the resources of that moment and turned them on the economy to extraordinary effect, like the multifocal, fragmented, unstable subject of feminism, constantly under construction, insisting on something better. She domesticated the economy, insisting that the economy is something we do rather than something that's done to us. Where most saw a unified capitalist structure and/or set of practices, she uncovered a diversity of capitalist and non-capitalist, market and non-market activities. And of course, one important effect of this uncovering of diversity was to reclaim the economy as a site for ethical decision-making and practice. In the latest phase in which Gerda Molding has been an active participant or important part, they've extended the scope of this ethical thinking beyond the human to broader considerations of coexistences and interdependency. Alongside this huge theoretical contribution, I think there's been three further characteristics of J.K. Gibson-Graham's work, and now Gerda's research as well. And it's all tied up with this willingness to take risks, to partake in and to encourage a kind of very serious play. So first, they've taken a stance that looks and feels and works very differently than standard academic criticism. They've had it with scholarship that simply confirms what we already think we know. They characterize their posture as one of openness, welcome. They characterize themselves as theorists of possibilities. And by documenting this proliferation of opportunities, they present us with and sharpen our ethical choices. Second, they understand their research process to be performative. They're intent on creating what they call hybrid research collectives, which are elements of assemblages that create more openings, more possibilities, that generate more ethical decisions and choices. So, in other words, their research isn't just documenting what exists, they're working to very actively working to bring other worlds into existence. And third, they operate within a kind of a very interesting reversed utopic temporality. That is, they're catching glimpses of the possible future or futures in the present. Altering the temporality of Lenin's famous question, what is to be done, they ask, what is being done? And to answer that, they set out to kind of build this amazing archive of ethical projects, collecting and categorizing collaborating and circulating, proliferating connections and possibilities for the future. We're missing, of course, one member of the collective today, but I think one of the striking aspects of the 5 sessions that were organized to commemorate Julie Graham on Wednesday was its fusion of temporalities, remembering, continuing to learn from the present, thinking about the future. So I'll turn things over to Kathy now to take up this very serious work of play, the play of imagining the future. The title of the talk, as you see, is An Economic Ethics for the Anthropocene.
Well, thanks very much, Jerry. And thanks to Monica, who organised this lecture, which was supposed to have happened actually last year. And Julie and I would have been able to give it together. And Gerda wasn't coming last year. She was going to come this year, and she's gone and got pregnant and is halfway through a wonderful pregnancy. So she would love to be here, but I'm happy that she's at home looking after herself. And thanks to Andrew for introducing and organising this lecture. I must say at this point of the conference, given that the Community Economies Group met for 2.5 days before the conference began, I'm starting to feel like this big kind of Humpty Dumpty figure where I'm just a big head full of ideas and these little legs coming out that have never had any exercise and for about 5 days. I just feel like it's been wonderful, but it's like, ugh. I'm sure everybody's feeling a bit like that themselves. I hope that we can have fun together here, thinking about an economic ethics for the Anthropocene. And I hope also that we can turn the discussion into a joint discussion, because many of us have shared a lot of sessions together already over these last few days. And there's lots of issues that have come up that I think bear upon the talk that I'll be giving today. Is that repeating bothering you? It's just me. Okay, well, the other thing about this talk is that it's actually a lecture based on a paper that's already been published in the 40th anniversary issue of Anthropocene, a radical journal of geography. And I've got Wendy Lana sitting there to thank for inviting Julie and I and Gerda into this project to write a piece for that, the issue and the book that subsequently came out. So I kind of apologise that the paper has already been published, and some of you may have well read it, and I know some of you had some troubles teaching it. So, but on the other hand, I feel like this is a wonderful opportunity to bring these ideas to an audience that's interested in ethics, justice, and human, and I hope more than human rights, because those issues are central to the argument of this paper. And I really look forward to your comments and responses at the end of the lecture. Given that it's a third of the authorship that's giving this paper, I know I can rely on a lot of other of you to kind of chip in your own views that were expressed in this paper that who knows whether I'll be able to explicate again. Well, anyway, let me start. Well, in 2008, the Geological Society of London announced a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene, in which humankind is foregrounded as a geological force or agent. And here I'm quoting Mike Davis. The Holocene epoch, the interglacial span of unusually stable climate that has allowed the rapid evolution of agriculture and urban civilization, has ended. And the Earth has entered a stratigraphic interval without post-parallel in the last several million years. In addition to the build-up of greenhouse gases, the stratigraphers cite human landscape transformation, which now exceeds annual natural sediment production by an order of magnitude, the ominous acidification of the oceans, and the relentless destruction of biota. This new age, they explain, is defined both by the heating trend, whose closest analogue may be the catastrophe known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum 56 million years ago, and by the radical instability expected of future environments. Evolution itself has been forced into a new trajectory. Well, these are apocalyptical images. The end of the Holocene, the coming of the Anthropocene, the displaced trajectory of evolution. They toss us onto a meta-historical playing field without a clue as to how to play the game. Suddenly, we're not just billions of individuals and millions of collectivities, but a single species among other species. A species whose survival is threatened by its own behaviour. So the kind of images that we have of things like the global dimming of Northern Europe producing impacts that produce then the desertification in the Sahel, which now is producing dust storms that produce asthma incidences in the Caribbean. These kind of pictures of global interdependence of our creation to some extent and the problems that have emerged from it are more and more present to us. The geological reference to millions of years, though, which used to make our brief lives seem inconsequential, now endows us with gargantuan agency and an almost unbearable level of responsibility, intuitively perhaps beyond our capacities for rational or concerted action. In response to scientists' warnings, solutions are being proposed and put in place, or not yet being put in place in the case of Australia and the US and many other countries. Efforts to generate political momentum for change are intensifying, and we see within all the grassroots movements that are enrolling, as we see in all the grassroots movements that are enrolling people to act, especially around and after the Copenhagen climate meetings. Climate scientists, frustrated that confronting the world with terrifying facts is not enough to galvanise appropriate action, have begun to call upon social scientists to come up with new approaches to social change. And here the debate rages over whether technology alone can solve our problems or whether fundamental shifts in values are required. Techno-skeptics point to the history of energy-efficient innovations that have resulted in cheaper appliances, leading to more widespread appliance use and the overall increases then in energy consumption. And proponents of value shifts are similarly unconvinced. As Kirsty Hobson argues, information campaigns don't engender changes in values, and changes in values don't automatically yield changes in behaviour. Yet this is what we are ultimately seeking, it seems, ways of living differently with the earth. Eco-philosopher and feminist Belle Plumwood is eloquent and arresting here. She writes, "If our species does not survive the ecological crisis, it will probably be due to our failure to work out new ways to live with the earth, to rework ourselves. We will go onwards in a different mode of humanity, or not at all." Well, from this perspective, responding to the challenges of the Anthropocene is not simply about humans finding a technological or normative fix that will control and restore the earth. It's about human beings being transformed by the world in which we find ourselves. Or, to put this in more reciprocal terms, it's about the Earth's future being transformed through a living process of interbeing. But how do we put ourselves and the Earth in the way of such transformations? How do we get from an abstract ontological revisioning to a glimmer or a whiff of what to do on the ground? No answer arrives when we ponder this question, just a spacious silence and a slowing down. Silence and slowness are openings and opportunities for the body to shift its stance, to meld a little more with its surroundings. Chances for the mind to mull over what floats by on the affective tide, or to swerve from its course as momentum decreases. Undoubtedly, these are openings for learning. Not learning in the sense of increasing a store of knowledge, but in the sense of becoming other, creating connections and encountering possibilities that render us newly constituted beings in a newly constituted world. Bruno Latour, among others, has called this learning to be effective. We are created as bodies, beings, by the entirety of human and non-human conditions of the world that affects us and from which we learn, if we're open to doing so. This learning is a process of co-constitution that produces a new body world. So what does this mean for an economic ethics of the Anthropocene? We're all familiar familiar, I think, with post-humanist ontologies that imagine, and here I'm quoting Kay Anderson, an entangled world of living and non-living things in which the lines marking off the human from the non-human are relaxed. If we can read these new ontologies as evidence of learning to be affected, and thus as part and parcel of a newly sensitised and conditioned world, if we can understand them in Deleuzean philosophy terms as a means of going on, rather than a cerebral ivory tower pastime, to quote Sarah Watmore, if we can treat them as symptoms rather than precursors of change, we may be able to see that an ethics for the Anthropocene has already emerged. And from there, it might not be such a stretch to discern an emerging economic ethics in the projects and activities of communities worldwide. It would then be our role to theorise this nascent formation and make its practices and promises visible, thereby participating in a new phase of its existence. And so it's with this kind of intuition that I want to begin my exploratory discussion. Well, for several decades now, Julie and I and a group of other scholars have been involved in a project of rethinking economy, opening to and being practically affected by the wide diversity of economic activities that offer possibilities of livelihood and well-being within and beyond the ostensibly global purview of capitalist development. We've also opened up to our necessary interdependence with the rest of humanity and to the possibility of building economic communities in which that interdependence is acknowledged and enlarged. Theoretically, as well as through participatory action research in a number of locations, we, alongside others, have experimented with the ethical dynamics of building community economies in the air, in theory, and on the ground communities. But it took the near simultaneous death of the Holocene and ecofeminist philosopher and forest saver Val Plumwood to kind of shock us into a post-humanist project of learning to be effective. So it's a recent thing. Val died in 2008, and it was at her funeral on her beloved Plumwood Mountain as I experienced that presence of her passing, and as a butterfly hovered over her casket, an open paper mache coffin, then I really sensed that need for a shift in our thinking, to carry on the baton that she had, and she and others in the Ecological Humanities group. And it's wonderful to have Leah here as part of that group. I really had started. So that moment was very much a moment of affective change and shift for me, and then through its ramifications with Julie and Bertha. So this paper is really coming out of that moment, and where we've started to begin the process of opening our economic thinking and enactments to encompass what Jean-Luc Nancy has called the being in common of all beings, human and non-human, animate and inanimate, processual and fluid, as well as categorical and definite in conception. So the written paper actually unfolds in 3 sections, and today I'm really only going to address the first 2. So those of you who are interested in the way in which we've started to join emergent hybrid research collectives around rural and outback Black Australia, thinking about land degradation, will need to look at the written paper for that particular section. So first I want to look at how we think about learning to be effective. And I'll start with a few questions. How do we allow ourselves to be transformed by the world we're inhabiting? How do we open ourselves to earth others? How do we acknowledge our co-constituted being as body-world? Well, here I think we've turned for inspiration and guidance not only to Val Plumwood, but also to Eve Sedgwick. Both of them emphasise a bodily posture of openness, a reparative stance that is conducive to learning, which itself is a transformative process. They both point to a kind of bodily learning that Latour calls learning to be effective. We've grasped onto this evocative notion for a number of reasons. It provides an accessible place to start, the body, in assessing and addressing environmental crisis. It offers a greater field of possibility and perhaps no more uncertainty than technological and normative approaches. And most importantly, it distances us from the subject-object dualism that separates humans from a disparaged or discounted non-human world. Performing this dualism has arguably led us into planetary crisis, and unperforming it may turn out to be a key practice for an ethics of the Anthropocene. So let's start with the body and think about learning to be effective. Drawing on a reading of William James, Latour suggests that to have a body is to learn to be affected, meaning effectuated, moved, put into motion by other entities, humans or non-humans. And to illustrate this kind of constitutive process of living and learning, he takes us to the perfume industry, focusing on the training sessions through which one acquires a nose that can differentiate subtle variations in smell. So an odour differentiation kit consisting of a range of fragrances is used to train noses, thereby becoming part of or coextensive with the body. Latour writes, through the training sessions, body parts are progressively acquired at the same time as world counterparts are being registered in new ways. Acquiring the body is thus a progressive enterprise that produces at once a sensory medium and a sensitive world. Latour contrasts the learning to be effective vision of body-world co-constitution with the familiar static ontology of body-subject or object-world. Latour's perfume industry example depicts a dynamic, changing, living body world, proliferative and differentiating rather than stable and monolithic. As he introduces other intermediaries into the example, including scientific debates between physiologists about the olfactory and gustatory receptors, and strategies for marketing and making perfume, Latour argues that the more entities involved, the greater the opportunities for registering difference and the wider, more highly differentiated the world becomes. Rather than narrowing down options and inputs, learning to be effective embraces multiplicity and diversity as creating more possibilities for registering and enacting the world. Latour refers to this world as the multiverse, no less singular than a universe, but constituted by beings becoming sensitive to differences. So we're interested in thinking about learning to be effective as an ethical practice, one that involves developing an awareness of and in the process being transformed by coexistence. We're also interested in the ways that an ethics of learning to be effective might be operationalised in a wider arena. So we turn to a book called Disclosing New Worlds by Spinoza, Flores and Dreyfus, where they offer fascinating examples of society-wide and even global changes that have been initiated and performed by this kind of learning. One of the most compelling of these examples, I think, that they give of these concerns is a citizen action group called Mothers Against Drink Driving, or MAD. That, they argue, transformed the culture of responsibility in the United States. And this is the timeline from their website of the MAD group when they began and the activities that they've been involved in. So MAD was formed by a group of women who had experienced the death or serious injury of a loved one due to drink driving. This group came together to share their pain and anger, which only grew as their collective inquiry identified the profound disconnect between the huge losses that they had suffered and the very minimal level of responsibility for those losses attributed to drivers. MAD's strategy was to talk to a wide range of citizens, including lawyers, medical professionals, educators and corporate executives. The mismatch between the mother's powerful emotions and the relatively casual treatment of drunkenness helped them create a new sensitivity that enabled them to differentiate the subtle ways in which drunk driving was differently absolved across many communities. Most of the medical community, for example, at that time, seemed to accept that a few daily drinks would have little impact on health. So instead of focusing on a single practice or law, MAD initiated learning to be effective among interdependent others in a plurality of subworlds that could contribute to their cause. And eventually laws were passed increasing penalties for drunk driving and setting up decreased acceptable levels of blood alcohol for drivers. And Spinoza et al. See the group as initiating a society-wide ethic and practice of full responsibility. A practice that now informs safe sex practices, dietary awareness, smoking behaviour and exercise regimes. The process of learning that began with a small group of mothers deeply affected by loss and lack of accountability became a generalised way of living with ourselves and each other. Well, from our perspective, we can discern in this example the co-constitution of a new body world in which alcohol, blood, brain, pathologies and sex differences are connected in new ways with far-reaching manifestations in law, medicine, behaviour and instruments of measurement. Literally, we have acquired new bodies in which the breathalyzer is a sense organ. Pregnancy and alcohol don't mix. Apparently pregnancy and coming to conferences doesn't mix. And a range of cancers are associated with moderate rates of alcohol consumption. I should take that to note, actually, given what I've been doing the last few days. The activities of MAD remind us that research can play a central role in ethical practices of learning to be effective and disclosing new or differentiated worlds. In Latour's perfume industry example, it's not just the pupil that learns and is thereby created, transformed, differentiated. A hybrid research collective, including the professor, an odour kit, the pupil, the laboratory setting, and the collective body of science, interacts in a process of co-transformation and co-constituted action. It is, as we see in the story of MAD, a hybrid collective that learns. So for us, and this is really Goethe's insight, I think, to bring this out, a hybrid research collective is an assemblage that through research increases possibilities for being in the world. The concept was initially developed by Kellogg and Rabba Harasoa, I always have trouble with her name, through their analysis of a muscular dystrophy patient organisation in France. The story of this hybrid entity begins with a medical and scientific community that had no interest in muscular dystrophy. To put it bluntly, people with muscular dystrophy were dehumanised. They were all viewed as the same terminal case. In the late 1950s, though, families and patients affected by the disease joined together in the Association Française contre les Myopathies, AFM, to undertake research on the disease. So muscular dystrophy research then started to instill a sensitivity to life with muscular dystrophy. And this enabled people with the disease to have differentiated bodies, in Latour's sense of the word. Patients became personalised for clinicians and researchers, while gaining depth and complexity. And as patients interacted with a variety of specialists, scientists, laboratories, prostheses, genetic materials, and even a worm whose genome was used as a model, they were learning to be effective. To quote the authors, their own understanding of the disease was enriched with an array of new human and non-human entities that they learned to describe and with which they became accustomed to sharing their existence. So one might go so far as to say, as the authors do, that they learned to think of these entities as part of themselves. Among all the human and non-human actors, the gene is singled out by the authors as holding the collective together. For example, the gene enabled patients' identities to be transformed so that they could be seen as citizens with a small genetic difference. The gene enabled fundraising that could appeal to a number of different disease communities in addition to muscular dystrophy. The increasingly gene-differentiated world brought to life through the hybrid muscular dystrophy collective offers many new possibilities for living and acting. Patients now have a range of experiences open to them, and medical sciences have developed new areas of expertise and career paths. Genes are actively implicated in an ever-expanding array of biological and social outcomes. To quote the authors here, one researcher will accompany the discovery of a gene by creating an animal model and then testing gene therapy. A second will continue the gene hunt by studying other diseases. A third will concentrate on proteins and their functions, and so on. Each choice can be part of a different set of alliances. Drawing on Paul Rabineau, Kellogg and Rabba Harasoa describe these co-transformations as yielding a new biosociality. Well, Well, taking off from this characterisation, you could perhaps say that through our own hybrid research collectives in the Rethinking Economy projects, we've been attempting to produce a new econo-sociality. Over the past 2 decades, our action research around the world has attempted to reclaim the economy as a site of ethical decision-making and practice. In all our research conversations, the economy, rather than being seen as out there in the stock markets and corporate headquarters of global cities, has been domesticated, brought down to size and made visible as a site of everyday practices and familiar institutions. A powerful image that has emerged from these conversations is that of an iceberg with formal market transactions, wage labour and capitalist enterprises at the tip, underpinned by a myriad of submerged but sustaining alternative non-market transactions, alternatively paid and unpaid labour, alternative capitalist and non-capitalist enterprises, forms of finance and property and so on. And we've used this image and the diverse economy diagram in which it's encoded as a kind of inventory kit, not unlike the perfume industry's odour kit, to produce economic actors attuned to their multiple economic roles. We've added in our more recent work columns to do with property and finance. This kit locates everyone as contributing to and part of the economy in multiple and different ways. The heightened economic sensibility that arises from using this kit has spun off discussions about the ethical choices that confront people in daily life as they participate in a diverse economy of interdependent being in common. And here I'm just trying to indicate the space of decisions that we've got to act in the economy in certain ways. Do we want to be involved in cooperatives, in alternative currencies, in communal or slave class processes and so on? I won't go out, I won't elaborate this diagram because I think many of us are familiar with it. So the idea of the community economy doesn't take on all the diversity in the diverse economy. It really introduces the idea of discussions and negotiations around what kind of interdependent being in common we seek. Well, retrospectively, we can understand our research experience as involving a hybrid research collective of learning to be affected by economic diversity. Such learning provokes a questioning of all the inherited givens that see, for example, the unemployed as economically inactive, or the household as a dependent site of consumption, or minimally capitalised self-employed businesses as usually unviable, or cooperatives as backward-looking, or capitalist corporations as unable to care for the environment, or unionised workers as defending collective well-being. These are the kind of inherited givens that we can start to question and put up for ethical kind of analysis and negotiation. So the diverse economy catapults multiplicity and economic differentiation to the fore and helps us to confront the ingrained belief that capitalist economic relations are the only driving economic force. Once this one-way street towards development becomes just one among a number of avenues, economic innovation proliferates. New possibilities for enterprise development emerge from discussions around the inventory kit. As these possibilities are pursued, new enterprise forms are created which lead to greater differentiation of the inventory kit and the possibility of developing new types of enterprises in different locations. And really, a lot of our action research at this moment has been around the enterprise column, work around proliferating different kinds of enterprises. But many other people's work in the whole kind of solidarity economy and in our own collective has been about proliferating difference in those other dimensions of economy. In our action research, people and agencies have been transformatively affected and new body worlds or body economies have been created, ones that are dynamic and differentiating rather than stuck and singular. Localities that were defined in terms of deficiency and need have been re-experienced as sites of surplus possibility where alternative pathways to shaping economies are continually opening up. Taken together, these processes of co-constitution are producing a new econo-sociality, what we've called a community economy, at the core of which is the negotiation of interdependence. The diverse economy inventory kit then assists with clarifying the ethical choices involved. It doesn't tell us what to do, but it clarifies where those kind of discussions need to happen. For example, Will a local government continue to grant free access to a closed preschool building so that a group of volunteers can keep their Sanders workshop open? This is a concrete example. The kit can help local officials and can help us as theorists to locate all the economic activities that flow through and around such a workshop that contribute to the integration and resilience of the local community. For example, in the Sanders Workshop, which is an enterprise that came out of action research that Jenny Cameron and I were involved in the Latrobe Valley, and that celebrated its 10th anniversary last year. In that particular workshop, we could see a number of different kinds of economically diverse transactions and activities. There was barter with the corporate sector, employment of people on work for the dole programs, volunteer labour and purposeful work in a social environment offered for disabled people and carers. There were gold coin donations for access to materials, gifts of paints and timber from individuals in the business sector, recycling of waste paint, production for use by local residents, sale of surplus product, gifting of products to families in need, and gifting of income to local school breakfast programs. Once we start to elaborate all the differentiation that was taking place through that entity and present that back to the local government, which was actually underwriting this by offering us a free space, what they were doing became proliferated, I think, and differentiated, and one can start to care about it in a very different way. Okay, so while this example and others we could mention suggests how close we've come to practicing an economic ethics of human interdependence, they also indicate, I think, how distant we still are from an ethics for the Anthropocene. In small and local ways, the human being in common of our action research has changed the world, and including ourselves and our research collectives. And more extensive ways it has changed and has contributed to the world of possibility. But we're just beginning to be affected by the coming of the Anthropocene, and have barely glimpsed the world of economic possibility it carries with it. So I want to turn now to how we're attempting to extend our thinking to the ethics of more than human interdependence, seeking out already, as we do, existing projects that are learning and acting and being with a more than human world. Well, in our project of Rethinking Economy, we hoped to open the eyes of economic activists and everybody else to projects and possibilities of non-capitalist development here and now. As Jerry rehearsed, rather than pose the time-honoured but often paralysing question of what is to be done to produce change, we chose in our economic research to marshal examples of what is already being done, thereby contributing to the credibility and strengthening of alternative economies. So in a similar move then, here I'd like to take a closer look at diverse experiments that are all around us to see that many hybrid collectives are enacting ethical practices of learning to be affected by the Anthropocene. In these experiments, humans already have a sense of their more than human lives as works in progress. So by joining these experimental collectives, in other words, by bringing our perspectives and analysis to bear on them, we hope to increase their legibility as economic projects, engaged in inventing and practicing an econo-sociality that involves the human in relations of mutuality with the more than human. So we focused our reading of contemporary experiments that are building community economies on 4 ethical coordinates of econo-sociality. And for those of you who read post-capitalist politics, you're familiar with these coordinates or concerns of the community economy around the commons, how a commons is produced and sustained, whether and how products and surplus are to be consumed, the whole consumption issue, what is necessary to personal, social and ecological survival, and how surplus is appropriated from and distributed to humans and the more than human. So I'm trying to read these coordinates of these concerns now through an interest and a concern for interdependence with Earth others, with the more than human. These ethical coordinates function as a rudimentary language of economy for us. And what follows, I want to extend our use of these coordinates to survey and sort out the entangled spaces of ethical negotiation in which interdependence between humans and non-humans is being acknowledged and transformed. And I'm just going to give you some very brief examples that may help to convey the range, if not the magnitude, of these transformative interactions. So first to the commons. Anthropologist Stephen Guterman has taught us that a community economy makes and shares a commons. There are many experiments worldwide that are currently extending community beyond the human species. For example, in September 2008, the voters of Ecuador accepted a world precedent-setting constitution that protects indigenous and all peoples' connections with their more than human world. The Constitution now includes a Bill of Rights that gives nature the right to exist, persist, maintain and regenerate its vital cycles, structure, functions and its processes in evolution, and mandates that the government take precaution and restriction measures in all the activities that can lead to the extinction of species, the destruction of the ecosystems or the permanent alteration of natural cycles. So this Bill of Rights, this document, will guide laws that recognise and validate an Indigenous worldview in which the duality of the private and the commons dissolves. To the extent that the Constitution is respected, those economic activities that interfere with nature's cycles will be banned or regulated, and others that promote the diversity and resilience of species, ecosystems and natural cycles will be supported. The Ecuadorian Bill of Rights was co-drafted by the Community Environmental Legal Defence Fund, which has assisted communities in the US to put in place first-in-the-nation laws that treat ecosystems not as property, but as rights-bearing entities. A movement is underway that could potentially transform what has been seen as common property, and well or badly treated as such, into members of the community that have rights and a voice in ethical economic decision-making. At the same time that nations and localities are extending rights to the more than human, collectives around the world are taking action to replenish, share and live with the commons in new ways. This is an example in Melbourne, and I'm just quoting here from a resident of this community in inner city in Melbourne, which is an eco-village. We in our conventional lives today export all our harms to a commons we don't ever see. Westwick brings the commons to your front doorstep, and you can't avoid the fact that your actions have a direct impact on your water supply and the quality of your soil, says Michael McCann. This eco-village is an inner-city community in which organic and human waste is treated on site, grey water is recycled, rainwater is caught and used, and solar power captured for heating and power. In drought-prone Australia, Michael McCann and his co-residents are learning to live and garden in ways that respect the seasonal rhythms and variable quantities of water and the daily rhythms and unboundedness of solar power. While producing novel options for urban design, Westwick is also producing a new human body, one that turns on the tap and experiences connection to reservoirs, the hydrological cycle, and the needs of neighbours and more than human others. As a complex assemblage of worms, water, waste, bacteria, energy, space, tanks, sunshine, children, vegetable growers, plants, and no doubt unaccounted for guests like possums and cockroaches, Westwick is a hybrid neighbourhood community economy that is producing a new local commons while participating in an intentional eco-village experiment to invent a new econo-sociality. And I think some of us who have become bodies that compost, or compost, as we say over here, on a regular basis, we've found that disjuncture living in a situation now in an apartment where you can't. And there's a kind of sense in which our bodies can't be what they were, even though it's probably a practice that we've only been doing maybe for the last 5 or so years, some of us much longer. So this sense of a body that does something and that is something different, I think you can start to recognise. So let me just talk about then the idea of consumption. And really it taps into that same issue. The relatively new attachment to recycling is evidence of a shift toward living with that has occurred as the degraded earth and its inundated creatures have imprinted themselves on our 21st century bodies and psyches, in large part due to the efforts of the environmental movement. around an emerging ethic of consumption with its technologies, bodily habits, moralities, and waste possibilities, economic communities are formed, new commons emerge, and economic possibilities proliferate. In the recycling and reuse sectors, a diverse range of enterprises have sprung up. Not-for-profit charitable enterprises, volunteer organisations, social enterprises, capitalist firms, cooperatives, child can collectors, and barter networks. And in a number of the papers that some of the sessions we organised, we heard a lot about the kind of economic diversity in this sector in countries of the global south. For example, in a rural Philippine municipality in Mindanao, a social enterprise has been established to take coconut coir, to make coconut coir into matting for erosion control, fibre for mattresses, plant hangers and furniture. The primary raw material of the enterprise is a waste product, the waste coconut husk that once clogged waterways and destroyed marine habitats all around this community. And this is an example of the new enterprises that it's based on consuming in a very different kind of way. Many communities are making individual and social consumption the focus of concerted action, and in doing so are reshaping felt responsibilities and connections between humans and the more than human. And here I'd just like to mention Kelly Dombrovski's work, she's finishing a PhD, that's looking at a network of households that are committed to raising children without using nappies and using homemade cleansing agents and very different kinds of consumption practices. And here they're picking up on practices, of course, that have been used in China and other places for centuries. But it's a very interesting inversion of techniques that are moving between different poles of the world. Okay, necessity. What do humans and other species and ecosystems actually need in order to survive with some kind of dignity? This question increasingly intrudes upon what were formerly purely economic deliberations. The needs of animals, plants, soil and water sources, for example, have become a matter of concern that's actually reorganising the food production industry. Reorganisation has been, of course, moved on by rogue infectious agents such as the prions that cause mad cow disease and the algae that grow in stagnant water holes. But also, of course, they've been moved on by animal and environmental liberation movements. The need for chickens to scratch the earth, move about, take dust baths, nest at night and lay eggs in comfort is acknowledged and accommodated in the growing organic free-range poultry industry. While the price of eggs and poultry meat from this sector cannot compete with that of mainstream producers, the presence of this niche has put pressure on the mainstream to improve the living conditions of its birds. And in Australia, I think we've been we've made so much more aware of the need for rivers to be nourished by water. So the whole issue of water allocations is changing the face of agriculture in the Murray-Darling Basin and changing the way we think about what fruit we're eating. We are becoming increasingly aware of how human needs implicate planetary needs. And I think the whole calculation of ecological footprints is one way of starting to become more aware of what we're doing, what impact our needs and our growing consumption habits have had as a way of starting to think through this question of what do we really need and what do others need in order to flourish. So this is very brief, and I have to, obviously, people will have many other examples, I think, of these kinds of ethical practices that are emerging. Just lastly, let me come to surplus. Traditionally, Marxist and labour advocates have been militantly concerned about the exploitative capitalist class process in which surplus value is appropriated by non-producers from the workers in an enterprise who produce it. The whole question of the exploitation of living labour. But what if we were to add to our concern about the exploitative interdependence between producers and non-producers, a concern for the unaccounted for exploitation of the non-human world? So here's just a kind of ethical audit sheet. We have been so concerned, I think, in the left movement, the working class movement, about this relationship between wages or survival of the working class and the surplus that's taken. But what if we were to include in survival the survival of our planet? Because usually the contribution of the more than human is not really taken into account, and in practice it ends up in the residual we identify as surplus. So many corporations make a surplus, make a profit on the basis of unaccounted for from what they're taking from the environment, of course. And this is true not only for so-called exploitative and non-exploitative enterprises alike, whether they're capitalist firms, worker cooperatives, or interdependent producers. To reorganise and recognise and account for the needs of the non-human world would be to raise the social allocation to necessity and reduce the social surplus generated finally appropriate. It would be to take some of that surplus and put it not just into shareholders' dividends, salaries for CEOs, executive bonuses, speculation, or to put it back into higher and higher wages for a particular group of waged employees, but to put it back into repairing the environment. It would mean then the growth of activities focused on regeneration and maintenance of the environmental commons and the dignity of animal life as an integral part of production. It would mean a fundamental change in the nature of business thinking and practice. Indeed, with a smaller surplus available for investment, the whole economics of growth might be called into question, and an opening created for a new economics focused on sustenance and interdependence. Now, such a shift might seem impossible when posed in these kind of macro terms, but the beginnings of a change is clearly happening and visible at the firm and industry level. And just one example of that is the case of Interface Carpet. It's a company that really pioneered the whole modular carpet product. And its CEO, a guy called Ray Anderson, is a very interesting guy. There's a whole website around what he calls his epiphany, after reading a book, The Ecology of Commerce by Paul Hawkins. This guy who had grown this company, was working all over the world producing modular carpet, suddenly began to see himself as a plunderer of the world's resources. And even on the mission statement of the company, it talks about Ray's epiphany. This was a moment in which he realised he had to change his business and business practices if he wanted to continue to, to live. He became affected by what was going on in the environment, and he started to change the firm to become one that no longer used raw materials, but actually recycled and used old carpet. So total, complete waste, closing the cycle. And so the company now is a kind of leader. It's one of the race to the top in terms of a company that is taking the needs of the environment on board in how it develops and thinks of new products. It's a whole section on biomimicry and so on. Just one example, and obviously this is coming out of a way of harnessing the surplus, the profits that the company is making, and putting them back into retooling the company in a very new way, and retooling the company to accord and to think of the needs of not just the workers, not just Ray and his shareholders, but the needs of the environment. Well, I've just given a few examples, I think, of when we start to put on different glasses, when we start to look for the ethical practices that may be emerging, that may be indications of the way in which we're learning to be effective in new ways with others, with the modern human. We can start to see the opportunities that will arise for different kinds of economic practices, economic enterprises, and so on. The community economy coordinates focus attention on ethical practices that produce economic connection and change. The coordinates prompt us to trace the ways that attending to the needs of the more than human reallocates surplus, shifts patterns of consumption, and starts to replenish the commons. They constitute rudimentary elements of an economic theory. They're categories that separate points of analytical interest while at the same time enabling us to map and differentiate the ethical space of an economy. They help to distance us from the structural dynamics that have plagued economic theorising, allowing us to represent an economy as a space of negotiated interdependence rather than a functional or dysfunctional growth machine. They also offer a tool for discerning an emerging economic order and participating in its performative consolidation. Not unlike the gene in the muscular dystrophy example, the coordinates can be seen as having multiple potential functions. By tracing ethical negotiations around the coordinates, we can connect activist communities. We can foster acknowledged interdependency and solidarity. We can proliferate economic possibility. We can create new identities. We can prompt new research questions and the formation of hybrid research collectives. Faced with the daunting prospect of global warming and the apparent stalemate in the formal political sphere, this paper has put the hybrid research collective at the centre of change. Research is framed here as a process of learning involving a collective of human and the more than human actors, a process of co-transformation that reconstitutes the world. So just to recap the sequence of ideas that I've presented here, I started with Latour's body to give us a sense of a differentiating, co-creating process of transformation. I used the MAD collective to convey the rapid and far-reaching changes that are now codified in law that can arise from a small group of learners. And I used the muscular dystrophy story to provide an example of the proliferation of actions and identities that a hybrid research collective can engender in a brief period of time. So it's this vision of how things change that grounds our economic ethics for the Anthropocene. What we can see all around us are ethical practices of economy that involve the being in common of humans and the more than human world. Each of these practices is involved in building a community economy in which sustenance and interdependence are key values. Each is more or less embedded in a hybrid research collective, which is more or less effectively learning to be affected, and more or less successful at proliferating alliances and avenues of action. What I think we would hope to stimulate here is an academic interest in expanding and multiplying these hybrid research collectives, and thereby participating in a world-changing process. Thank you for listening, and thank you to these two wonderful women whose ideas have been part of this. Thank you.
Okay, we have some time for comments, questions, discussion. So, anybody?
I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit about sort of the, because I always, in my work, I use this phrase about, community and environmental well-being. And I'm just wondering about, it just seems very win-win. And where is it that it, I'm just thinking of the fishermen I work with, they have to make a living, and then there's these environmental issues. And there's always this tension between, there's always a kind of discourse of trade-off that's always produced it. And I'm wondering sort of how does one get out of that kind of trade-off discourse using this method?
Well, first of all, I invite anyone to answer this question and anyone to help me think about it, because I think it's where we're at. That's what we're thinking about, And I guess I have some great co-authors here who've been thinking, Stephen and Jenny, we've been working on this book, Take Back the Economy, Any Time, Any Place, which is trying to operationalise these coordinates, these ethical practices as a tool for having these discussions. So, in a sense, the notion of trade-off has kind of entered into our thinking. The balancing act that people are involved in. And I don't know, I guess trade-off is one language, balancing act is another. It's less kind of economistic to some extent, but I think we are in multi-dimensional kind of balancing acts when we think about the questions of how hard do we want to work, earning money for what, why are we this came up in the sessions, a wonderful kind of discussion around housing issues and the discussion of co-housing and social housing. One of the relief that people had was that they no longer have to work so hard to pay for a mortgage, therefore they have more time to start to care for each other and care for their environment, etc., etc. So I think that is the very discussion that we need to be having, because it's how do we as groups start to trade off how we're working, what we're needing to live on, what impact that's having on what nearby communities and what near and far off communities, and in planetary kind of sense, what environments and so on. So I don't think there's no answer, of course, because we're always going to be doing that. But the more we can I guess, become more aware of what are we balancing. And I guess the biggest thing here is we're balancing comfortable lifestyles at everybody's peril. And why if that becomes something very present to us, we start to act differently. And so I think just questioning, bringing those things bringing all those coordinates into play with each other in discussion with others is the process of beginning to see that it's always a balancing act. But what we're doing at the moment is totally jeopardising our own futures and our children's futures. So once we get that clear, I think things start to happen. But Jenny wanted to enter in here.
Well, I just want to say, in terms of the paper, it seems like the fishermen are really learning to be effective because of that relationship, because of what they see happening in the oceans, and what it means to their boats and their nets, their jetties, the people who prepare fish and all of that. So I mean, it's almost like if them thinking through in terms of that language trade-off is exactly, as Kath said, what more of us need to be doing. So we're trying to turn the tap on, thinking about like Australia. What does that mean in terms of our water, our precious water resources? And I think enough of us aren't doing the trade-off. So it's like, what can we learn from the ways in which fishermen are starting to think through how they make those trade-offs? It's like they're doing what many more of us need to be doing.
Well, if I could just add, I mean, and part of it is they do that, and they're very aware of it, it seems, and then they get to a limit, in a sense, where they can't bear the cost themselves. It's like, oh, so you want us to give up all of our livelihoods, so, et cetera, right? And so that's where it has to kind of, I'm just thinking of sort of technologies to expand beyond the 15 fishermen I'm working with to, further, that kind of conversation.
Well, and what might be the role of research play in enlarging that conversation so that more people can get involved in that conversation, which might be a role of research, individualised research.
And I guess working backwards is to work through things like looking at people's own consumption habits and commodity chains. And we started to do this for one of the chapters. We started looking at what was in the cupboard and looked at the cans of tuna that we were eating for lunch, and we started to realise, oh, wait a minute, let's go and look at that company, and is it a signatory to the protection of areas in the Pacific or not? And, we could be buying that product, which actually is. So, it's like coming at these things and the chains of interconnection in multiple ways, so that those fishermen that you're talking about could be connected by particular consumers who are changing how they're practicing. But I suppose the other thing I could see in your case is that limit is there, but if there's some discussion of alternative economic practices, like the community support of fishing and so on, the limit shifts because another kind of economic entity, a differentiated economy comes into being. So the limits are set by certain parameters and certain senses of what economy is, and as we can't start proliferating different kinds of enterprise forms and so on, the limits will shift a little bit too. So it seems like, but then connecting that community to the wider is partly I guess the challenge that we have.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the talk, and I've read your paper before and really enjoyed it. I guess my question comes from the Anthropocene. In a sense, we've had Anthropocenes in the past. Because the concept of the Anthropocene is sometimes tied to the concept of civilization. And numbers of anthropologists have written about collapses of civilizations in various ways, invoking concepts of complex societies and such in the past. The difference with our Anthropocene, perhaps, is that it's a global phenomenon and it's not a localized phenomenon. And I'm thinking of people like, I think there's a fellow called Tainter who's written about collapse of complex civilizations, or a Canadian, Ronald Wright, who's written about similar collapses. And in those collapses, one assumes that there would have been diverse economies, diverse economic practices within those societies. And my question is, have you engaged in your reading around collapse and complex systems reaching limits, and then the economic ethics that are necessary to address those limits. Have you engaged do you have thoughts on how those kinds of discourses in other disciplinary domains have affected your conception of the Anthropocene, or the economic, or even the human? And have they affected your thinking around this paper and the work that you're taking forward?
The simple answer is no. Haven't done that kind of thinking or that kind of work, because I suppose, I guess it has a feel of closing things down to me. You know? Oh, well, we had diversity before and it didn't help, you know. And I guess that is it's not attractive to me as a way to go. I think there's problems with the Anthropocene notion and its timing, etc., etc. Where do we put it? Is it just Ray Hudson, the Carboniferous capitalism that's produced it, or is it agricultural production and deforestation? Way beyond that. In fact, the evidence is seeming to show now that the impact of deforestation way before the Industrial Revolution has been as important, and that the water in the atmosphere is probably as important. And this is a very hopeful thing in some ways. So, and this is the paper that I've been mentioning that the eco-philosopher Freya Matthews has written, is saying that, you know, a lot of what we may be needing to do is actually work with ecosystems just to allow them to regenerate. And it's not that we're wanting reforest for carbon sequestration, it's just for the moisture they put into the atmosphere. That, you know, our problems could be much more simpler than we think, to some extent, if we start to work with ecosystems in a different kind of a way. But that doesn't answer your question. But no, I haven't, and I suppose, those kind of... I guess if we're seeing something as an emergent system, to what extent is it replicating exactly what happened before or not, is my question, I suppose. And then, again, I think there's a lot to be learned from looking at the economic diversity of past civilizations, and the civilizations that we think are past but are still here. So where I've intersected that to some extent is looking at all the practices, say, in Asia, around kind of economic diversity that so much theorising of development has obliterated, and yet are still there. So it may be the old kind of irrigation societies that were supposed to have just been destroyed, but so many of those ethical relationships between communities and around waterways and so on are still embedded in people's understandings, and trying to work to get them more out there. I mean, and this is a really interesting issue around climate change, particularly for, I think Michelle was mentioning this before, you know, trying to get more of a sense of how people over eons have been dealing with climate and sea level rise, and they've got all sorts of practices that we haven't attended to. So, you know, some little points of connection there.
I really like what you said about recycling. And it was reminding me of some conversations I've had recently. It seems like I run into this discourse all the time, that recycling is a way of making you feel better about yourself, and it really doesn't matter. You can put up the graphs about everything, and you're making it see that it's becoming a body that's affected, that's connected to the flows of material through our lives. And the way that like a technology like a recycling bin can help you become that body, you know, and recycling bins, whatever. There's this a voice that wonders if those technologies sometimes are problematic. I'm thinking about the example of carbon offsets, which also have that great effect of, you know, the people who have a practice of offsetting their travel. I think that's a way of being in relation to the world that's very fruitful. But there's clearly ways in which those programs have really problematic impacts, and the ways those programs are administered, the effects they have on communities where the trees are being put that are supposedly being the offsets to that. So, and I guess these technologies can be fraught in a way. I wonder, how do we reflect ethically upon the actual becoming of the body that is able to have this ethical reflection? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that, you know, it's a continual process, and each strategy that we come up with to think about this is going to need continual revisioning and rediscussion, I think. But I guess I just vie away from the position that sees things as automatically or always already flawed. You know, that there's an impetus that's produced carbon offsets. It may not be, using the market in that way to solve the problems. It's not. We don't want to put all the eggs in that basket, but it's one kind of experimental strategy, and then we might. Yeah. So I just guess I feel like we have to put this kind of thinking to work on all these kind of examples, and looking at what kind of bodies we've become through the technologies, the car. I mean, all the obesity issues kind of thing is. It's like, what have we become in the technological advancements that we've made? And so doing that retrospectively as well as into the future is kind of a whole interesting process.
Yeah. In developing a series of robust alternative economies, the question of enclosure, I think comes to the fore pretty quickly. How do we build these kind of alternative economies, these experiments that are resistant to the demands placed on them by capitalism, and that are resistant to sort of being co-opted by the system and just being integrated into another form of branding, or and essentially giving up their identity as alternative economies by their being co-opted by the system.
Come on, someone, try and help me on the co-option question.
If you go back to the chicken example,
yeah, you're going to come. Which side are you going to come in on, Scott? I'm not going to let you in on the wrong side here.
That's another question, but if you go back to the chicken example, then I suppose that, what I was taking from your chicken example is that you can't compete, and you are able to co-option, but in that co-option is going to be transformative practices, in your terms, for the system. And so the chicken will get a slightly cage, or they'll run around in barns and pick each other to death or whatever. But you're going to get a different kind of you're going to get a transformed system, and then if the system is transformed enough, then.
So, thank you for that. The great thing about doing presentations with two people is that there always has someone else to say something while you're thinking of something else to say. That's why I encourage collaboration in presentations. But, in a way, co-option is something one can theorise, and non-co-option is something one can theorise. So the easy way is to say any experiment is going to be co-opted, because that's the big picture. We have this monster capitalism, and all it does is see something new and take it over for itself. Now, there's theoretical work going on there to make that statement and to keep that statement alive and make that seem totally understandable, and yes, that's the way it happens. And now there's other theoretical work to show that co-option doesn't always happen, or that if co-option does, it's also producing something else, etc., etc. So all I'm saying is, yes, of course, everything could be co-opted. I don't want to spend my time theorising co-option, because all I'm doing is co-performing co-option. I'd like to theorise non-co-option and openness. So that's why we did the work on capitalism, because I don't have this big system co-opting everything. Plenty of people do, and their theoretical commitments are to making that, continually exposing that to us all. So, my question is, yes, it's happening. Of course it'll happen. But what do we put our intellectual labours into? And if we start to put our labours into showing non-co-option, what does it mean to start to recognise that a chicken needs some space? What difference does it make to us to even have that thought? What does that enable? So that's kind of one of my answers, another answer to that question. Yes, collaborator?
The chickens look better if they've got more space. And I was thinking...
They look better.
Yeah. And I was thinking... and then we were talking about, you mentioned kind of obesity in cars, and I was wondering whether beauty would be a kind of a good avenue into this. And I think of the high stuff on the economy and his distinction between the general economy and the exchange economy, or the restricted economy. And he says our problem is that we don't waste enough, or we don't waste gloriously, and I mean, and his examples aren't good. I mean, cutting out half with an obsidian knife and those kind of things is kind of the examples. So I'm not suggesting and he wasn't suggesting we go back to doing that, but because that's not allowed. But I think I mean, I wonder whether I wonder whether the kind of the constant kind of eye to the future is and I realise you're not doing this, so like, you know, well, that's not your kind of your project, but it's with this constant eye to the future, and that's why I understand what you're doing in the present, is trying to kind of find things in the present. But I wonder if finding kind of, like looking at something kind of aesthetic in the present is a kind of, might be a way of kind of getting outside of the kind of constant rationality or rationalising of it, because of, I know this is a bit mud, but I think that there might be the same logic that kind of, this is David's point about capitalism, it's a kind of a constant anxiety about the future that kind of led those things to happen. And what strikes me is that similar kind of logic is part of the ecology movement too, and maybe a way of thinking about, you know, this respect or openness to others is to kind of think about something, not what they can do for us, but just the chicken looks better when it's kind of running around on the grass and get a small paddock.
Yaya's got an answer. It's got a reflection. Can everyone hear this?
Another question about that. In terms of ethics, what is the ethics here, right? In the sense that immediately ties back to the aesthetics and also comfort or conduct and way of being. It's learning to be effective. Is that the ethics, right? Sort of being open, but sort of what kind of being open? Sort of describe this problem. Maybe another part of it is the issue of interdependence. It's interdependence, but interdependence can be experienced in ugly ways and beautiful ways as well, right? Interdependence with a symbiotic relationship where you're actually experiencing in a painful manner, right? Pain and aesthetically not pleasing manner, but also interdependence can be experienced in a sort of different way, an aesthetically pleasing way. I don't know if this catches it, but there are modalities of it.
Yeah, and I guess I'd be resistant at trying to set up some kind of morality here, where there are rules that enter into this ethical space, because that is a space of negotiation in which, yes, a form of interdependence could be a dependence, like it is with a child, or an indentured labourer with their employer, in the case of a domestic servant who's saving up to set up something different in the Philippines, But I guess it's putting that into examining this, bringing it into examination. And the idea of beauty and waste, rest is waste in some view. And that whole discussion that we had in Una's session about, she was talking about the household and the house as a place where there's kind of the surplus labour can be kind of just put into things that then go on in generations through beauty, the things that you make, etc. So I think there's lots of ways we can start to think about time, what are the elements that give us, that create interdependence, and whether it's, how we conceive it as good or bad, or sustaining a community economy that we think we're committed to or not. I don't want to close it down, because I feel like that is the discussion. That is what a community economy is that discussion at any point. And so some of the elements of it could well be the things that you're bringing up. Waste becomes redefined, beauty perhaps becomes redefined, but it's going to happen within some sort of collective discussion, or some discussion beyond one's own kind of sense of realisation, a self-other relationship, So, but I think this is where, what is an ethics of economic practice? That's the kind of question that we're poised on, trying to put something in there, and put something in without it being too stuck, I think. And that's where we're thinking together.
Thanks, Kathy. I think that was a wonderful talk. It got me thinking about a number of things. But one tension that I think arises, and I think it's a productive tension, is that if I understand the ethics that you're evoking, it's a very post-human ethics, but it's taking a lot of humanist terminology, rights, responsibilities, being in common. And it made me think of a couple of weeks ago, Nicholas Rose came to visit us in our department in Toronto, and he was talking about the new brain sciences and a new way of thinking about the collapsing of the human into the scientific and the technical in a very non-humanist way. And I think that when we think of a way that we want to be, I would very much find myself drawn closer to your language. But then I wonder if this tension of humanist, post-humanist, non-humanist, if we need a new language, if we need a new way of thinking to shove away some of these older concepts, and how we can get there.
Which is what occurs to me when you talk like that is, I think, in a way, the language is going to come to us because we've got that sensibility of the non-human, the way in which and this is where, say, Jane Bennett's work I find really useful, where she says, our bodies are all these inorganic chemistry kind of connections and atoms, and we're very much non-human as well as human to some extent, and all our electrical impulses, etc. But she also argues for the usefulness of a sort of anthropomorphic language that says, well, let's be the electrical impulse in the brain that's going to come from the amygdala to the whatever. Let's identify with it to some extent. So it's anthropomorphizing the non-human in order to kind of shift ourselves as humans. So I think there's going to be a movement back and forth. I don't think that we can just say there's going to be another language out there. We can't totally get rid of our humanist sense, but we can start to play with it in different ways. And so that's what I think. Yeah, I think that's my answer.
Thinking about aesthetics kind of reminds me of some of the conversations that happened on previous sessions when we started to talk about some of the outcomes of these diverse economic projects as being rethinking citizenship and having, like when folks see themselves as actors in their own community, it kind of evokes citizenship in some sense of I have a capability of acting on the world, and I'm really not using citizenship that it's a broad definition of citizenship. But one of the things that's come out in my own research with artists and artisans is, and I think also that Tim's paper spoke to about community radio, that it's like this possibility of looking at aesthetics and using art and creativity and shifting yourself, and Ted's work too, shifting yourself from exclusively being a consumer to also being a producer. And is it a producer of art? Is it a producer of CSAs or other models? But there's just something about, anyway, your aesthetics just got me thinking about that broader conversation about, one of the things that's happening here is, as we rethink who we are in the world, as we think of ourselves as being more active in that world, there's just more possibilities for how this can come.
And can I?
Sure, please do.
When Yale kind of mentioned ugly, I suppose I thought of the other word that kind of would be the other aesthetic, and I think it might have more resonance in this context at least, and that's anesthetic. And I suppose if you're wanting to kind of remove the anesthesia of the process, and so then that might be kind of a
So liveliness.
I think anesthetics is good sometimes.
Anybody else?
I think just to back with that, maybe we could come up with some techniques for enlivening those interactions. So where you do feel something when you can tap on or
Electrode. The wrong button. You're a lot of fun there.
I mean, like technologies to just
to electrocute people around.
But maybe not to fall into behaviorism there, but to think of actually multiple practices, actually dislodging of anesthesia, right?
Yes.
In that sense, we can think of a subjectivation not as a kind of learning to behave per se, but actually dislodging certain fixed abilities and redistributing abilities, right? So constant redistribution of abilities.
And I guess, I mean, if we're taking that argument about differentiating the world in order to proliferate possibilities, you're differentiating the self and the experiences that one has in the economy as well. So it's that idea of the range, bringing up the range more. Yeah. And I think that, that comes when you start to look at the do-it-yourself people that are studying, the range of activities people are involved in and what that does for them as people, as selves. It's like, it has a certain beauty and a pleasure and an awakening from that anesthesia. But not in a too much humorous sense.
Scott, I just keep thinking about the uniform project.
Right, yeah.
Which is this project that this one woman who has got, one black dress, the little black dress, one little black dress that she wears every day of the year, but dresses it up with something that's been gifted or, she's bought on eBay or whatever. And in some ways it's a very individual project, but then as we started to talk to people about the example, including Kathy's daughter, she's now investing in her household, and they're going to do this household uniform project. So there's something there about that aesthetic that is incredibly appealing to a particular audience that is something that then can become proliferated.
Yeah, it's a great example of a kind of intervention in fashion. So this woman came up with a dress and she decided to wear it every day of the year for 365 days, but published a picture of it every day on the web. And it was always looking different because she had gifted or op-shop, scarves and stockings and wore it back to front and all this kind of thing. And she put aside some money every day to put into this education program in India, but it managed to raise 100,000. And of course the fashion industry were very scared, so they gave her the Elle magazine Woman of the Year award. They decided they better co-opt her because otherwise. But anyway, people have taken it on. So she's saying she was totally fashionable, but she was just using, she was interested in what was going on about cotton and all this kind of stuff.
The project continues to do it, and she's raising money for all sorts of groups, both in the US and outside the US, and other people have taken on the project, individuals and potentially groups.
Yeah, so it's that's a kind of mixture of different consumption.
Just one more point, which was the use of social media to disseminate this experiment. So in that regard, it was another example of a hybrid research project with respect to fashion. And so, the thing is, any one of us could document these sorts of experiments. So right next to Clark, I have a couple of students who are colleagues who are urban homesteaders, and they're making BMO videos of how to weatherize their home, how to use vermiculture properly. And I'm not sure how big the audience is, and neither are they.
It's pretty big if you can see how many times you've done.
Right.
Hundreds of thousands of times that people are trying to learn these things.
Yeah. This is last week's, right?
Just like in my perusal of random homesteading skills, and I don't understand how to do, but someone else.
Right. Yeah, these things, if they end up on Wiki out, so what? That would just be another, awful list of things.
It's not just suggesting something to do a project on a whole impact factor of, number of times things that you've got a project,
just to make one more point, there's a shift in disposition here that's really important that you know, and that's the playfulness. So I forget who mentioned Winnicott in one of these sessions, but it's worth remembering that play and creativity are really connected. That's a different kind of non-work or wastefulness that ends up being incredibly important in terms of creating a context for nourishing itself.
Just getting back onto that language thing, I think, part of that play is looking at things, words like responsibility, and when you put those things into kind of, does responsibility mean, that kind of drudgery, or does it mean answering? And does it, can you kind of, but like, I suppose this is kind of, as I understand it, at least part of hiding it's kind of etymological kind of project, and he wants to hear these different kind of meanings in words so that you can take the thinking elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that something like that language, it's not pinned down, but I mean, but you can't mean everything at all times either. I mean, we're kind of weighted by history.
I thought Stephen's mention of play was a good way to potentially go and play.
All right, thank you for coming to this thing. Katherine?